The void was never silent in war. It trembled with the thunder of particle cannons and the shrieking distortions of gravitic lances tearing holes through reality. Beyond the vast diamond glass windows of the command spire, Admiral Sathis Varith watched the Dominion fleet fall into its perfect formation, a lattice of gleaming warships shifting and flexing as one organism. Their crystalline hulls refracted starlight, sculpted for beauty as much as destruction, and each ship's pulse echoed in his mind through the fleet link. Order, precision, inevitability, these were the virtues of the Varith, the virtues he had lived his entire span to preserve. Opposite them, the swarm came. The Carrack did not march in formation. They surged like a tide, ships grown from bone and black chitin, spitting webs of burning plasma in arcs without symmetry. They did not believe in elegance, only consumption, and the memory of worlds they had already devoured seared itself into the Dominion's history like a wound. Now they had come for Ralthus Prime, the jewel of the border sector, and Sathis would not, could not, allow it. Fleet status, he intoned, his many-faceted voice resonating through the chamber. Formation locked, answered tactical, a six-limbed Varith officer hunched over a glowing console of living crystal. Shields at full harmonics. Strike wings awaiting release. The Admiral flexed his spined limbs against the floor's resonance field. He could feel the power of Aurora's crown humming beneath him, the flagship's vast crystalline heart synchronized with his every command. This ship was the culmination of his people's genius, an apex of technology that no lesser race could comprehend. It was not just a vessel, it was the Dominion incarnate. Sathis spread his limbs wide. Release the wings. On the outer displays, squadrons of dart-like interceptors peeled away, each fracturing light into streams of color as they accelerated toward the Carrack tide. The first exchange was brutal. Swarm ships dissolved into burning shards as Dominion beams cut them apart, but for every one destroyed, two more emerged, writhing and shrieking through the void. The enemy advanced without fear, without pause, their bodies dying only to fertilize the path of those behind. Sathis's limbs twitched with restrained rage. The Carrack were filth, an insult to the ordered beauty of existence. They would be broken here, shattered against the will of the Dominion. Bring the spinal lance to charge, he commanded. The chamber dimmed as energy was siphoned from the flagship's core. A resonant vibration rippled through the deck, a note that harmonized with the crystalline hull itself. Officers bowed their limbs reverently. This was the ship's true voice, the song of annihilation that only Aurora's crown could sing. A lesser being might have doubted. The swarm was endless, their numbers beyond calculation. But the Admiral knew better. Perfection triumphed over chaos. Always. The forward view filled with the monstrous outline of a Carrack dread beast, a living fortress swollen with armored carapace, its maw glowing with embryonic suns. The fleet's lesser weapons had barely scorched it. This would be Aurora's crown's first true strike. Target acquired, said tactical. Fire, Sathis declared. The flagship's crystal heart flared. A line of pure light erupted forward, bending space around it, piercing the void as if the universe itself could be carved. It struck the dread beast square, shattering its organic plating, boiling its innards into vapor. The thing convulsed, split apart, and bloomed into a cloud of glowing fragments. The bridge resonated with a chorus of triumph. Another. Sathis roared. Press the advantage. Show them the Dominion's perfection. Around him, the fleet moved as one. Lances burned, cannons flared, and the Carrack recoiled under the onslaught. Yet still they came, reckless, heedless of loss, their numbers like a living ocean. The Admiral's focus narrowed, every command a blade, every order a cut into the swarm. He did not notice the human child watching from the shadows of the lower gallery, her wide eyes reflecting the shifting brilliance of the displays. Kayla Hale stood pressed against the railing, unnoticed by officers too consumed by duty to care for a mechanic's daughter. Her father had left her there, muttering that it was safer than the engine decks, though she doubted anything was safe while monsters filled the stars. She said nothing, only stared, small fingers tracing patterns in the cold crystal of the rail as if memorizing the rhythms of the ship's song. Below her, the Dominion's pride carried the battle forward. Interceptor wings scythed through smaller swarm ships, coordinated with flawless precision. Energy shields shimmered as Carrick plasma spatters broke and fizzled against them. Each movement of the fleet was deliberate, elegant, rehearsed through centuries of doctrine. But the swarm pressed harder. A cluster of Carrick ramships hurled themselves into the fray, colliding with Dominion cruisers in suicidal detonations. Gaps opened in the formation, ships buckling and fracturing under the assault. Sathas's spines bristled. Tighten the net. No weakness, no hesitation. The fleet responded instantly, maneuvering with impossible synchronization, sealing the breaches. Yet the Admiral's thoughts lingered on the endless waves still coming, on the knowledge that even perfection could be drowned by numbers if the tide never broke. He turned his gaze to the living crystal of his command console, its surface alive with streams of light, symphonies of data. Here, at least, there was no doubt. Aurora's crown was flawless, the weapon that would decide this war. And under his command, it would never fail. Never. The moment came without warning. 1 second, the Aurora's crown sang with the resonance of 1,000 crystal lances, the next, it went silent. The lights on the main console flickered and dimmed, streams of data freezing mid-flow. Weapons locked, shields shivered and held at partial harmonics, and the bridge trembled with a shudder that felt wrong, unnatural. Status report. Sathas barked, his limbs flexing in sharp, precise movements that belied his sudden alarm. He had felt the subtle vibrations of the ship for centuries, knew its rhythms as intimately as the resonance of his own body. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Tactical's 6 limbs trembled as she swiveled between her consoles, her crystalline claws tapping futilely against unresponsive interfaces. The core, it's unresponsive. Systems are rejecting commands. Shields are fluctuating, no, dropping, at irregular intervals. Sathas's spines bristled with tension. Explain. The ship, it's not acknowledging us, Tactical stammered. All command inputs are being ignored. The crystal arrays, they're locking themselves down. It's behaving as if it's refusing orders. A ripple of shock passed through the bridge. The Varith had engineered Aurora's crown to be perfect, to obey instinctively, to harmonize with the mind of its captain. A failure of this magnitude was unprecedented. It was unthinkable. Sathas's many eyes narrowed. Impossible. The vessel cannot fail. I am the Admiral. I am attuned. The ship, he halted, tasting a sour fear for the first time in his life. The ship's song, its symphony of light and energy, had stopped answering him. There was a silence that pressed against the hull, a void that even the stars seemed unwilling to penetrate. Attempt manual override, he commanded, though his voice lacked the usual resonance. Synchronize the auxiliary cores. We will force a response. Engineers surged to the lower decks, crystalline tendrils coiling over the consoles as they tried to wrest the systems back under control. Sparks of pure light arced across the panels, indicators blaring warnings that no one could decode in time. The Admiral watched, rigid, as seconds stretched into minutes, the swarm pressing forward through the gap that opened in the formation. A flash of panic gripped him. The fleet, hold position. Compensate for the flagship's silence. But even as the orders echoed across the fleet link, some cruisers faltered, unsure how to react to a leader that had gone mute. Interceptor wings slowed their maneuvers, their elegant arcs now jerky and unpredictable. The Carrick took advantage, pressing the attack where the Dominion's symmetry broke. Below deck, Joran Hale worked feverishly at the engine cores, his human hands smudged with grease and burns. He did not belong on the bridge, not in theory, but somehow he had been drawn here, sensing the failing hum of the living crystal beneath the floor. He banged a panel open, muttering about junction circuits and flux harmonics, cursing in the low, guttural human way. Come on, you over-engineered heap of pride. But it was no use. The interfaces did not respond to brute force or clever adjustments. The ship was not broken in the conventional sense. It was shut out. It had chosen to ignore everyone. Sathis roared in frustration, his limbs snapping against the floor as if striking the deck could restart the core itself. I am the Admiral. I command this vessel. Obey me. Nothing. A sudden, piercing alarm drew every eye to the forward displays. A Carrack dreadlance had slipped through the weakened formation, its chitinous hull glowing with embryonic suns. It was a missile poised to tear through the unprotected sector of the fleet. Shields wavered, energy faltered. The moment for intervention was vanishing. Admiral, Tactical's voice was brittle. We cannot. Yes, we can. Sathis snapped, but even he heard the cracks in his own certainty. His pride, his very identity, had always been bound to the flawless performance of the flagship. Now, that pride felt fragile, as though it could shatter at any moment. The bridge was in chaos. Officers shouted, limbs flailing, struggling to regain the control that had always been theirs by right of intellect and discipline. Data streams that had once been poetry were now frozen, jagged fragments of light blinking in incomprehensible patterns. Every attempt to restore the vessel only made the lights flicker more violently, almost as if the ship were laughing, or weeping. Sathis's multifaceted eyes scanned the bridge, catching glimpses of every officer in panic, every human technician unsure where to even begin. The swarm pressed closer, relentless, and in that moment, he realized the unthinkable, the perfection he had relied on might not be enough. The flagship, the symbol of all that the Dominion stood for, was failing. And with it, their fleet teetered on the edge of annihilation. Kayla Hale, small and quiet, watched from the shadows of the lower gallery. Her fingers traced invisible circuits in the air, tracing patterns she had memorized on her father's freighter back home. She said nothing, merely stepped forward when no one noticed, drawn to the pulsing chaos of the frozen console. The Admiral did not see her. The officers did not see her. And yet, somehow, everything in the ship seemed to pause, waiting. The dreadlance drew closer. Time fractured into fractions of seconds. The Aurora's crown, the pinnacle of the Veritha's pride, lay mute, refusing command. The Admiral's mind raced, clawing for solutions. The impossible had arrived. And in the vast silence of failure, the fate of the fleet teetered on the edge of something he could not yet comprehend. Sathis's spines bristled as he paced the command spire, his limbs scraping across the polished crystalline floor with sharp, ringing clicks. The Aurora's crown remained unresponsive. The auxiliary cores hummed feebly, struggling to ignite, while the main arrays lay inert, unyielding to even the most intricate command sequences. Officers shouted over one another, their voices a tangle of fear and frantic logic. The bridge was alive with motion but dead of coordination, the ship's harmony had been replaced with chaos. Contain the core fluctuations. Sathis ordered, but his voice lacked the unshakable resonance it carried in calmer times. Tactical, normally calm and composed, had her 6 limbs moving frantically between consoles, each touch producing only a flicker of response before the interface froze again. The core is rejecting every attempt, Admiral. Every calibration, every realignment, none of it works, she barked. Her facets reflected the chaotic readouts in a cascade of prismatic flashes. It's almost like the ship is alive and do not anthropomorphize. Sathis snapped, but the words felt hollow. Even he had begun to suspect it. The flagship was more than a machine, it was a symphony of living crystal, a complex organism that had always resonated perfectly with his commands. Now, it refused to sing. The bridge lights pulsed erratically, and suddenly alarms screamed through the chamber. A cluster of Carrack rammers had broken through the fleet's formation, latching onto a Dominion cruiser. Explosions bloomed across the viewport, bright and jagged, scattering debris into the void. The fleet faltered, as if a single, central heartbeat had been interrupted. Sathas's mind raced, each possibility spinning out faster than he could process. He had faced threats before, had guided his fleet through countless battles, but never had the instrument of his authority betrayed him. Not like this. Not with a child's life, and the fate of the fleet, hanging in the balance. Shields are at 20%, Tactical reported. If we do not restore full harmonic alignment, the forward arrays will fail within minutes. The swarm, she broke off as another alarm blared. The dreadlance that had threatened the fleet now glowed ominously, preparing to fire. It would tear through the fragile defenses, cutting a path straight to the fleet's heart. The loss of the Aurora's crown in this state would mean immediate collapse. Bring manual interface protocols online. Sathas shouted. Divert all power to the lower consoles. We will override the central core ourselves. Technicians surged forward, but even as they activated auxiliary panels and recalibrated bypass circuits, the main console remained dark, unyielding, and uncaring. Sparks leapt from overloaded ports, and some of the engineers shouted in frustration, banging on panels as if sheer force could coerce obedience. Admiral, a junior officer cried. Even the bypass is being ignored. Every command is being rejected. Sathas felt the edges of panic, raw and bitter, pressing against the pride he had cultivated for centuries. He had trained for decades to anticipate any failure, any enemy, any miscalculation, but not this. Not a vessel of living crystal refusing its captain. The notion was intolerable. The ship seemed to pulse faintly, as if mocking them, a heartbeat out of sync with the Admiral's own. It was subtle, nearly imperceptible to anyone who had not spent decades attuned to its rhythms, but to Sathas it screamed. I am alive. I do not obey you. And then, from the shadows of the lower gallery, a small figure stepped forward. Kayla Hale moved with quiet confidence, her human form dwarfed by the spires of crystal and consoles around her. She had been watching, silent, her fingers brushing against surfaces she had memorized during countless hours in her father's workshop. She knew patterns. She knew hums. She knew the language of machines, even if they were more complex than anything she had ever touched. Sathas noticed her too late to stop the thought from crossing his mind, a child. Here. Now. Her eyes flicked across the frozen displays. She tilted her head, studying the lights as if they were not incomprehensible alien arrays but a familiar, stubborn puzzle. Her lips parted, and she whispered, just like Dad's old junker. The officers around her froze. A human child speaking in such a moment was inconceivable. The Admiral's many eyes narrowed, a reflexive surge of disbelief and outrage. This was not protocol. This was not order. This was unacceptable. Step back. Tactical hissed, but Kayla ignored her. She crouched at the nearest console, small hands moving over the panels. 3 presses, deliberate, precise, almost casual. A faint hum began beneath her fingers, subtle but undeniable. The ship's heartbeat shifted. It vibrated in recognition, a ripple of resonance threading through the core. Lights flickered, then flared, cascading across the consoles in a wave of brilliance that made the officers reel. The panels, once frozen and silent, began streaming data again, recalibrating in real time. Sathas could not believe it. The impossible was happening before his eyes. The flagship, his flagship, was responding. But not to him. To her. Impossible, he muttered, though no one heard over the swelling symphony of the revived systems. Weapons recharged, shields harmonized, and the auxiliary cores roared back to life. The dreadlance fired, and the Aurora's crown responded in kind, vaporizing the carrot projectile before it could breach the fleet's lines. The bridge fell silent for a heartbeat, all eyes on the girl who had restored the ship. Sathas's pride bristled, conflicted with awe. He had trained, commanded, and lived for this vessel, yet it had obeyed the instincts of a human child, small and quiet, unnoticed until this moment. The swarm's assault continued, relentless, but the flagship now moved as if reborn. Its engines flared, pulse cannons ignited, and the symphony of light and energy sang once more, only now, its conductor was not the Admiral. Kayla Hale's small fingers danced across the console, intuitive and unhesitating. The bridge had not seen such decisive action in decades. The officers followed her silent lead, the ship responding in perfect harmony to her touch. Sathas's mind raced. He had survived countless battles, yet never had he felt such a fragile, tenuous sense of hope. The fate of the fleet now rested not on doctrine or perfection, but on the intuition of a human child. And somehow, against all expectation, it was working. The Admiral's spines bristled, not in anger, but in the first stirrings of something unfamiliar, respect. And fear. The bridge was a storm of light and motion, yet for the first time in what felt like eternity, it was orderly. Kayla Hale's small hands continued to dance across the console, 3 presses repeated instinctively whenever the systems faltered, each one coaxing the living crystal of Aurora's crown back into perfect harmony. The ship's song rose again, cascading through the hull in pulses that vibrated through every deck, through every ship in the fleet, and even through Sathas's spines. The dread lances of the Carrack, their embryonic suns glowing, struck toward the fleet, but each was met with instantaneous retaliation. The flagship's pulse cannons flared, cutting through the swarm with lethal precision, guided by the rhythm of Kayla's intuition rather than the rigid algorithms of the Varith. Explosions bloomed across the void, but now, instead of panic, there was awe. Shields at full harmonic alignment, Tactical reported, her limbs still moving rapidly, but no longer frantic. Weapons responding to subspace recalibration. Admiral, the ship. Yes, Sathas said, his voice low, reverent, and strangely quiet. It moves. But not by my will. By hers. Kayla's attention never wavered. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing as streams of glowing data scrolled across the consoles. The ship pulsed beneath her fingers like a great living creature, understanding her in ways that had eluded even the most brilliant Varith engineers. To her, the complex, alien arrays were no different than her father's freighter back home, patched together with wires and duct tape, humming in imperfect but reliable rhythms. "Divert auxiliary power to the dorsal lance," she murmured. The words were soft, almost casual. The command rippled through the ship, and the massive weapon flared into life, a beam of concentrated energy streaking forward to vaporize a Carrack ram that had pierced the fleet's formation. The bridge officers exchanged stunned glances. Sathas's many eyes narrowed into slits, his pride chafing against the undeniable truth. The girl had no rank, no training, no right to command the flagship, yet the ship obeyed her as though she were born to it. "Maintain synchronized assault patterns," she continued, almost to herself. Her fingers pressed, released, pressed again. With each motion, the ship responded as if it were an extension of her own body. The pulse cannons fired, shields flared, engines adjusted thrust, and the fleet moved as one, following the rhythm set by her hands. "Admiral," Tactical's voice was hesitant, trembling with the mixture of fear and amazement that permeated the room. She's guiding the flagship through the swarm. Entirely on instinct. She's saving the fleet." Sathas remained still for a moment, his spines rigid, his eyes focused on the small human whose calm precision had done what decades of Varith training could not. "Do not speak her name," he said finally, his tone soft but commanding. "Do not acknowledge her in words. Only, follow her lead." Outside, the battle raged. The swarm pressed harder, their numbers seemingly endless. Yet each wave that advanced was met with an unerring counter. The Aurora's crown pivoted, fired, and pulsed in perfect rhythm, leading the fleet in a deadly, elegant dance that tore holes in the Carrack tide. Kayla's gaze flicked to the viewport, tracking the positions of every ship in the fleet with the precision of a lifetime spent memorizing circuits and patterns. She pressed another sequence of commands, and the forward shields flared, deflecting a wave of ramming ships that would have otherwise destroyed an entire wing of cruisers. Joran Hale, watching from the engineering gallery below, felt his heart leap. His daughter's quiet genius, the same curiosity that had always made her tinker with broken parts at home, was now the difference between victory and annihilation. He dared not speak, fearing distraction, but the pride that welled in his chest nearly shook him from the floor. Targeting recalibration complete, tactical reported. All weapons arrays aligned. Forward and dorsal cannons synchronized. The swarm's advance is faltering. Sathis' mind raced. Every instinct screamed that he should reclaim control, assert his authority, and take command of the flagship. Yet every moment he hesitated, the ship responded to Kayla with greater precision, striking down Carrick's ships before they could even register as threats. To force control now would be to risk destabilizing the ship, to risk losing everything. He sank into his command seat, limbs folding around him, and allowed himself a rare, silent concession. The fate of the Dominion's pride, its ultimate weapon, was no longer his to command. It belonged, for this moment, to the quiet human child who had seen the patterns in chaos, understood the rhythm in the alien arrays, and acted with intuitive brilliance that defied all doctrine. The Carrick were relentless, but their advance began to break. Squadrons that had pressed confidently now faltered, striking at gaps that no longer existed. Rammers collided and disintegrated, their numbers thinning under the coordinated onslaught that Kayla directed with nothing more than instinct and observation. "Engage the lateral drives," she whispered, sliding another sequence across the console. The flagship pivoted with uncanny speed, moving in a sweeping arc that cut off a cluster of Carrick ships attempting to flank the fleet. The beam weapons fired in perfect unison, disintegrating them before they could close. For a moment, the bridge fell into a rare silence. Even the alarms and flashing lights seemed to pause, as if the ship itself were breathing. Kayla leaned closer to the console, eyes intent, and the pulse of the Aurora's crown thrummed beneath her hands, steady and true once more. Sathis finally spoke, his multifaceted eyes meeting hers without words, a silent acknowledgement of what had occurred. Pride and fear warred within him, but the truth was undeniable. The ship, the fleet, the battle, they would survive because of her. Because a human child, small and overlooked, had done what the most advanced minds in the Dominion could not. Outside, the swarm faltered under the relentless precision of the flagship's renewed assault. Kayla's fingers never stopped moving, guiding, nudging, coaxing the living crystal to obey her untrained but infallible commands. In that moment, amidst the chaos of battle, the impossible became reality. Humanity, messy, intuitive, and underestimated, had become the salvation of an empire. The battle shifted, slowly, imperceptibly at first. The Carrick, once a tidal wave of destruction, began to falter in the face of the Aurora's crown's renewed assault. The flagship moved with a grace that belied its immense bulk, weaving through the void like a living predator. Pulse cannons flared, shields rippled, and energy lances streaked forward, guided not by complex Varith algorithms, but by the quiet instincts of Kayla Hale. Sathis stood at the center of the bridge, spines bristling with tension. He had long defined himself through control, through mastery of the vessel and fleet. But now, the lines of authority were blurred. His commands went unheeded, not out of disobedience, but because the ship itself had found a better guide. He could feel it in every vibration of the hull, the pulse of life, the living crystal resonating to her touch. Kayla, tactical began, hesitant, her 6 limbs twitching in disbelief. Do you understand what you are doing? Kayla's small hands hovered over the console for a fraction of a second before pressing another precise sequence. It's like the old freighter at home. You watch how it moves, what it likes, what it hates. Then you just help it do the thing it wants to do. Her voice was soft, almost casual, but the conviction behind it made every officer on the bridge lean forward, mesmerized. Observation, intuition, no, that's impossible, Sathis muttered under his breath. His multifaceted eyes narrowed, scanning the data streams across the consoles. The ship's outputs were flawless, the attack synchronized to perfection. Every wave of Carrick advance that had once been a threat was now shattered before it could reach the fleet. Yet the precision was human, irregular in ways the Varith system should never have allowed. It was chaotic control, the kind that the Dominion had always scorned. A sudden alarm flashed red on the forward viewport. A massive Carrack dread beast, larger than any the fleet had encountered, surged into the breach, its chitin glinting with bioluminescent menace. Pulse cannons fired automatically, but the beam dissipated harmlessly against its dense hull. The bridge tensed. Kayla did not flinch. She leaned closer to the console, her fingers tracing glowing pathways and patterns that made no sense to anyone but her. "Divert power to the dorsal lances first," she murmured. "Then, secondary harmonics to the forward shield arrays. Hit the center, not the edges." The ship responded immediately, the systems realigning under her intuitive commands. A deep, resonant pulse flared from the dorsal lances, striking the dread beast with pinpoint accuracy. The massive Carrack shuddered, its armored shell cracking under the force. Explosions rippled outward, debris scattering into the void, and the bridge erupted in controlled exclamations. Sathas's spine snapped forward, a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had fought countless battles, commanded fleets, and survived horrors beyond comprehension, yet he had never witnessed precision like this. Never had he felt the raw instinct of a mind interfacing with a living crystal vessel in such perfect harmony. "Keep it steady," Kayla whispered, almost to herself. "It likes a rhythm. It likes a beat." Her small hands danced over the controls, coaxing the flagship forward. The pulse cannons fired in a new cadence, the shields adjusted in real time, and the engines shifted the ship's mass like a dancer pivoting mid-step. The dread beast screamed in frustration and pain, its organic systems unable to anticipate the intuitive assault. "Admiral," Tactical said, her voice tight. "The swarm, they're pulling back. They're adjusting to the flagship's movement. They're afraid of it." Sathas's mind raced. The realization settled over him with an uncomfortable weight. The flagship, under the guidance of a human child, had become more than a vessel. It was a weapon of instinct, of intuition, unpredictable yet flawless. The Carrack, creatures evolved to exploit weakness, could not predict this. They were faltering. "Forward lances to maximum output," Kayla directed, her tone steady. "Sweep the left flank, then realign with the main formation. Watch the gaps, they'll try to split the fleet." The bridge obeyed her rhythm as if it were instinct. The energy beams lanced through the void, cutting down ramming ships before they could impact, shattering dread beasts in arcs of light and fire. Shields flared and deflected incoming strikes, the living crystal of the ship bending with her intuition, moving as if the vessel itself trusted her judgment more than any Varith officers. Joran Hale, watching from the lower engineering gallery, felt a surge of pride and terror. His daughter, quiet and unassuming, had taken command of the galaxy's most advanced warship without recognition, without training. And she was winning. She was saving them all. "Do not underestimate the child," he whispered to no one, voice caught in awe. "She knows what we cannot see." Sathas's eyes shifted, scanning Kayla's movements. His pride bristled, his ego screaming that he should reclaim control, that the fleet, the flagship, should answer to him alone. Yet every attempt to assert himself would risk destabilizing the delicate harmony she had forged. The ship's pulse, its living crystal, now sang to her rhythm. Interfering could break it. And so he remained, silent, watching, learning something new. Sometimes perfection was not control, but understanding. Sometimes the ship, and perhaps the fleet, needed intuition, creativity, and a quiet mind to survive. Outside, the swarm's advance faltered further. Squadrons hesitated, their attacks misaligned, rammers exploded in chaotic collisions, and dread beasts flinched under the precise strikes from the flagship. Kayla's hands never stopped, guiding, nudging, coaxing, and the Aurora's crown moved as one with her, a symphony of living crystal, human intuition, and calculated destruction. The impossible had become reality. The Dominion's pride, the most advanced warship ever created, had been saved by a human child, small and unassuming, whose quiet observation and instinct had turned the tide of the battle. And in the center of the bridge, Admiral Sathis Varith finally understood something he had never allowed himself to consider: the future of the Dominion, and perhaps the survival of humanity itself, could depend on the smallest, most overlooked minds. The Aurora's crown pulsed like a living heart, thrumming beneath Kayla's hands as the battle escalated around it. The swarm's advance had slowed, but they were far from beaten. Clusters of Carrack ramships surged from every direction, their chitinous hulls glowing with molten energy, desperate to pierce the fleet's defenses. The Dominion cruisers, once coordinated under perfect algorithms, now flowed in chaotic unity with the flagship's rhythm, weaving around the threats with uncanny precision. Sathis watched, rigid, his many eyes narrowing in both awe and unease. Every instinct screamed at him to reclaim control, to assert the authority that defined his centuries of command. Yet the truth could not be denied: the ship obeyed Kayla, and under her guidance, they were prevailing. Forward energy arrays to dorsal pulse realignment, Kayla murmured, her voice calm, almost detached. Her hands moved with fluid certainty, tapping, pressing, releasing in sequences that seemed to resonate with the ship's very soul. Each motion coaxed the living crystal into harmony, each adjustment sparking immediate response. The flagship shifted its weight, pivoted on invisible axes, and fired with preternatural timing. Tactical's limbs flickered over her own consoles, translating Kayla's intuitive commands into fleet-wide coordination. "All units, align with flagship vectors," she called, still struggling to reconcile disbelief with the reality before her. The fleet obeyed, swerving, firing, shielding, as though moved by a single mind. "Admiral," Tactical hesitated, her tone tight with tension. "The dread cluster, they're targeting the midline. If the flagship falters, it will rip through our formation." Sathis's spines bristled. He had already felt the surge of power beneath the hull, the pulse of energy responding to her tiny fingers. The thought of intervening, of forcing his own control over the ship, made him shiver. Interference might undo everything. Yet he could not simply watch. Kayla tilted her head, eyes narrowing as the displays flickered under the assault. "Secondary lateral arrays, reroute to compensators. We'll give them a taste of our rhythm." Her small hands moved faster now, tracing intricate sequences across the console. The ship responded instantly, its crystal hull humming with renewed resonance. Energy lances flared along the lateral arrays, striking out at the Carrack rammers before they could impact. Explosions bloomed in the void, jagged and violent, scattering fragments of organic ship matter. One dread beast, twice the size of a Dominion cruiser, reeled from the onslaught, its massive bulk faltering as synchronized strikes tore through its exoskeleton. Sathis felt a mix of pride, fear, and disbelief coiling through him. The child had no rank, no formal training, yet here she was, orchestrating victory where centuries of doctrine had failed. His mind struggled against his ego, against every notion of control he had built his life around. And yet the evidence was undeniable: the ship moved with her will, flowed with her instinct, and survived because of it. "Keep the frequency steady," Kayla whispered, almost inaudibly, her fingers sliding over the panels. "Don't rush the rhythm. Let it sing." The Aurora's crown responded, engines flaring and shields pulsing in perfect cadence with her commands. The pulse cannons fired in arcs, sweeping entire formations of Carrack aside. The fleet followed suit, guided by the living symphony emanating from the flagship. The once overwhelming swarm began to break apart, their advance splintering under the relentless precision of a mind no one had thought capable of such clarity. In the lower engineering gallery, Joran Hale's hands clenched over the railing. His daughter, so small, so quiet, had become the linchpin of the Dominion fleet. "That's my girl," he murmured, voice thick with pride. "She's saving them all." The flagship twisted, pivoted, and surged forward, Kayla pressing another sequence of intuitive commands. The living crystal pulsed with each motion, glowing along veins of power that no human mind could fully comprehend, yet she navigated them instinctively. The dread beasts recoiled, misaligned, and the rammers detonated in chains, creating gaps that would have been fatal to lesser ships. Sathis finally allowed himself a deep, measured breath, spines folding inward slightly. The fleet had regained cohesion, the flagship moved with flawless grace, and the swarm was retreating. Yet a tension remained, the battle was not over, and the Carrack were persistent beyond reason. Kayla's voice, calm and deliberate, broke through the tension. Realign the forward shields, dorsal arrays at 60%, lateral compensators in sync. Keep the beat steady. They'll try to flank again. The ship responded immediately, harmonics shifting in real time, pulse cannons firing preemptively, shields flaring just before impact. Another cluster of rammers exploded harmlessly, shredded by perfectly timed energy pulses. Even the dread beasts, massive and terrifying, faltered under the relentless, intuitive coordination. Sathis's spine snapped forward, a mixture of relief and fear. The battle was still raging, but the flagship, guided by the child, had seized the initiative. The impossible had happened, the perfection of the Dominion's most advanced warship had been restored, not by doctrine or skill, but by instinct, observation, and quiet brilliance. He watched her, small and unassuming, orchestrating the survival of the fleet. His mind struggled with what this meant. The child, human and underestimated, had become the most valuable asset in the Dominion's arsenal. Pride warred with reality, yet reality had already won. Outside, the void burned with light and fire. The Carrack were faltering, their attack scattered, their advance broken by a rhythm they could not anticipate. And at the heart of it all, Kayla Hale guided the flagship, small hands moving across alien interfaces with confidence and clarity that no officer could replicate. Sathis understood then, fully and irrevocably. The future of this battle, the survival of the fleet, and perhaps the fate of the Dominion itself now rested in the quiet human child. The Aurora's crown shivered through the void, its pulse a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through every deck. Kayla Hale's hands moved with unwavering precision, coaxing the living crystal to respond in harmony with her instincts. Each adjustment, each press, rippled through the ship, a symphony of energy that synchronized not just the flagship but the entire fleet. "Admiral," Tactical called, her voice trembling despite her controlled movements, "the swarm is reorganizing. They're attempting to outflank us from the starboard vector. They will fail," Sathis said, though his voice lacked the unyielding certainty it usually carried. He could feel the pulse beneath him, the living crystal thrumming in tandem with Kayla's movements. The ship was alive, yes, but it obeyed her. And it was terrifying. Kayla's fingers slid across the console, tapping sequences no one else could interpret. "Starboard lateral compensators to 65%, she murmured. "Shift the pulse sequence, yes, like that. Hold. Watch the gaps. They'll try to force the smaller cruisers into the breach." The ship responded instantly, its massive hull twisting on invisible axes as energy beams lanced forward. The pulse cannons struck preemptively, vaporizing the ramming ships before they could reach the vulnerable cruisers. The Carrack screeched in the void, their advance disrupted, their formation scattering under the intuitive assault. Sathis's spines quivered, a mixture of admiration and unease. He had trained for centuries, fought countless wars, and mastered vessels of living crystal, yet here a human child was guiding the flagship with a deftness that no Varith could match. Every instinct screamed to reclaim control, to assert authority, but he understood, with bitter clarity, that interference could destroy the fragile rhythm she had established. "Admiral," Tactical said again, softer this time, she's doing what we could not. The ship responds to her. She knows it." Sathis turned his gaze to Kayla, watching the small figure crouched at the console, her expression calm, her focus absolute. She was whispering commands, adjusting sequences, coaxing the living crystal with the familiarity of one who understood machines not by theory but by instinct. A massive Carrack dread beast surged forward, its bioluminescent exoskeleton glowing with a menacing intensity. Pulse cannons fired automatically, but the beam struck at the wrong angle, dispersing harmlessly. Alarms blared across the bridge, and officers froze, anticipating catastrophe. Kayla's eyes narrowed. Dorsal lances, divert power. Forward arrays, compensate for recoil. Shield harmonics, now. Hold it steady. Her fingers pressed a rapid sequence across the console, and the ship shivered, engines flaring as if acknowledging her intent. The massive energy beam struck the dread beast's weak points in a synchronized volley, splitting its exoskeleton with blinding flashes of light. The dread beast shuddered violently, flailing, and then disintegrated in a cascade of molten organic debris. The bridge officers blinked, unsure whether to cheer or remain paralyzed in disbelief. The Carrack advance faltered, and the smaller rammers began exploding in chaotic collisions under the relentless precision of the flagship. Secondary wave incoming, Tactical warned, her limbs moving frenetically to adjust fleet vectors in sync with Kayla's commands. They're trying to regroup. Kayla didn't look up. Forward shields to 70%, lateral compensators in sync, pulse lances at 20-second intervals. Keep the rhythm steady, they'll break if we don't miss a beat. Sathas's many eyes followed the sequence, observing in awe as the ship responded with near-living grace. The pulses of energy, the flow of power, the timing of shields, it was all fluid, instinctive, perfect. The fleet moved as one, guided by her subtle manipulations, each cruiser and interceptor following a rhythm it could not comprehend, yet executed flawlessly. "Admiral," Tactical said, voice tight, "the swarm, they're retreating. They're reorganizing again, but, the flagship, she's forcing them back. Entire squadrons are breaking formation." Sathas felt his pride bristle, even as he acknowledged the truth. The Aurora's crown, the pride of the Dominion, had been restored not through the brilliance of his training, not through centuries of Varith doctrine, but by the quiet ingenuity of a human child. The ship's power thrummed beneath him, responding to her instincts with a precision and elegance that even he could not achieve. Kayla's hands moved with quiet determination, adjusting the cadence of the pulse cannons, recalibrating shield harmonics, and coaxing the engines into arcs that no algorithm could calculate. The dread beasts and rammers faltered, their advance disrupted, their attacks neutralized. Joran Hale, watching from the lower decks, felt a surge of both fear and pride. His daughter, quiet and observant, had taken command of the galaxy's most advanced warship and was using it to save the fleet. Every instinct, every moment of observation and tinkering at home, had led to this. The flagship pulsed, alive under her guidance, and the swarm's assault began to crumble. Squadrons hesitated, misaligned, and rammers detonated prematurely, leaving gaps that would have been fatal under ordinary command. Kayla's rhythm never faltered, her calm, precise intuition dictated the flow of battle, guiding the ship and the fleet to safety. Sathas finally allowed himself to acknowledge it, the flagship, the fleet, the battle, they were being saved by a child, human and underestimated, whose quiet brilliance had become the linchpin of victory. Pride, fear, awe, they all battled within him, but reality could not be denied. The Aurora's crown moved with her, lived with her, responded to her. And in the endless void of battle, a new truth had emerged, the future of the Dominion's most advanced warship, the survival of the fleet and perhaps the fate of countless worlds now rested in the hands of a human child. The void around the Aurora's crown shimmered with cascading light as energy lances arced outward, cutting swathes through the Carrack formations. Kayla Hale's fingers moved across the console with steady precision, each press a note in the symphony she conducted. The ship vibrated in response, pulsing like a living thing, bending space and light to match her intuition. Sathas stood rigid at the center of the bridge, spines bristling, facets narrowed. He had faced countless battles, commanded entire fleets, and survived wars that would have broken lesser beings, yet here he was, watching a child orchestrate the survival of the fleet with nothing more than instinct and quiet observation. His own attempts at command felt intrusive, unnecessary, almost dangerous. "Admiral," Tactical said, her voice taut with tension, "the swarm is attempting a coordinated flank from starboard and port simultaneously. If we do not adjust the fleet vectors immediately, they will not succeed," Kayla interrupted softly, eyes scanning the flowing streams of data. "Compensate dorsal arrays for port deviation, lateral harmonics to starboard. Pulse timing at 15-second intervals. Follow my rhythm, don't break it. The ship responded instantly. Shields flared in perfect harmony, pulse cannons discharged at precise intervals, and engines shifted the massive vessel with grace no algorithm could replicate. Smaller cruisers followed the flagship's lead, their movements synchronized with the rhythm Kayla had established. The Carrack rammers collided, misjudged openings, and exploded prematurely, their advance faltering. Sathis felt a strange tension coil through him. Pride warred with reality, he had built his life around control, yet he could not, and should not, interfere. The ship, alive in ways he had never known, responded more completely to Kayla than it ever had to him. His spines folded inwards, a silent acknowledgement of the child's authority. A massive dread beast surged toward the midline, glowing with bioluminescent menace. Its approach threatened the smaller cruisers, and even the flagship's automated targeting failed to hit the vital points. The bridge tensed. Kayla's small fingers danced across the console. Forward shields at 80%. Dorsal lances to center alignment. Pulse cannons, wait for the beat, now. The energy beams fired in a calculated volley, striking the dread beast at multiple weak points. Explosions rippled outward, and the creature reeled, cracking its carapace, its advance slowed. Tactical's limbs moved rapidly, translating Kayla's intuitive adjustments into fleet-wide coordination. All units, match flagship vectors. Avoid gaps. Maintain the rhythm. The fleet obeyed, even those cruisers whose captains were still struggling to process what was happening. The human child's subtle, untrained genius had become the guiding force of a fleet that had previously depended on doctrine and flawless algorithms. Kayla, Sathis's voice was low, almost reverent. You understand the vessel better than any trained officer ever could. She didn't look up. It's listening. You just have to speak its language. Not commands. Rhythm. Her eyes traced the streams of data, noting the slight oscillations, the minute discrepancies in energy flow. It's like Dad's junker, you just nudge it along until it does what it wants to do. Sathis felt a flicker of unease. The ship, alive and responsive, trusted this child more than its designed captain. Yet the results were undeniable, the fleet was stabilizing, the Carrack advance breaking apart under the intuitive precision of her commands. Another wave of rammers surged forward, intent on breaking the fleet's formation. Kayla's hands moved rapidly, adjusting shield harmonics and pulse sequences in real time. The first line of rammers was vaporized before impact, the second collided with the debris of the first, detonating chaotically. The dread beasts behind them faltered, their advance disrupted. Joran Hale, watching from the engineering decks, felt a mix of fear and pride. His daughter, small, quiet, had taken command of the galaxy's most advanced warship and was directing it with a confidence born of observation, not training. He could see the pulse of the living crystal beneath the decks, responding to her like a pet to a master it instinctively trusted. Sathis realized the truth fully and uncomfortably, the Aurora's crown, the pinnacle of Varith engineering, was no longer his instrument. Its power, its precision, its survival depended entirely on a human child. Pride and protocol demanded he intervene, but wisdom, fear, and desperation urged him to stay silent. Hold the rhythm, Kayla whispered again. They'll break if we miss a beat. Watch the left flank, yes, redirect pulse lances. Perfect. The ship responded immediately, weaving through the void with calculated grace, striking down every threat before it could become critical. The Carrack assault faltered further. Their formations broke apart, dread beasts and rammers alike misaligned and destroyed before they could coordinate. The fleet followed the flagship's lead, moving as if connected to a single, intuitive mind. Sathis's spines flexed in acknowledgement. The impossible had happened, the Dominion's pride, its most advanced warship, had been saved and guided by a human child. The survival of the fleet rested in her quiet hands. Kayla Hale, small and unassuming, remained focused, her instincts dictating every move. The flagship pulsed beneath her, alive and responsive, and the battle slowly began to turn. For the first time, the Dominion fleet had the advantage. The Carrack, relentless and monstrous, were being broken not by perfection alone, but by intuition, observation, and quiet brilliance that no Varith could replicate. The Admiral finally understood, the ship, the fleet, and perhaps the fate of countless worlds were no longer defined by rank, doctrine, or pride. They were defined by the rhythm of a human child who had seen patterns where others saw only chaos. The battlefield and the void had begun to shift. The Carrack, once an unstoppable tide, were splintering under the relentless precision of the Aurora's crown. Kayla Hale's hands moved deftly across the controls, adjusting pulse sequences, shield harmonics, and lateral compensators with fluid, instinctive grace. The ship seemed to breathe with her, alive in a way no algorithm or officer could command. "Admiral," Tactical called, her 6 limbs trembling with tension and awe, "the main wave is faltering. Dread beasts are retreating. But there's a second cluster advancing from the nebula sector, they're attempting a flanking maneuver." Sathas's multifaceted eyes narrowed, his spines bristling. His pride screamed for control, for assertion of authority, yet every fiber of his being recognized that interference would be disastrous. The ship obeyed Kayla in ways it had never obeyed him. Any disruption could shatter the fragile rhythm they depended on. Kayla's gaze flicked to the viewport, tracking the incoming cluster. Forward shields at 90%. Dorsal and lateral pulse arrays in sync. Timing, don't rush it, let them overextend, then we strike. She pressed another sequence, subtle, precise. The ship shifted, the living crystal bending in response, engines pulsing as it pivoted to intercept the flank. Explosions bloomed in the void as the Aurora's crown released a coordinated volley. Energy beams struck the Carrack rammers before they could close the gap, vaporizing entire squadrons in brilliant arcs of light. The dread beasts faltered, confused and misaligned, their advance disrupted by the unpredictable cadence of the flagship. "Admiral," Tactical said softly, her voice tight, "she's not just controlling the flagship, she's directing the fleet. Every cruiser, every interceptor is moving in sync with her rhythm. She's orchestrating the entire battle." Sathas's spines flexed, folding inward slightly as he absorbed the truth. He had survived countless conflicts, led fleets to victory, and mastered ships of living crystal, yet nothing in his long life had prepared him for this. The future of the Dominion's pride, and the fleet, depended on the quiet intuition of a human child. Kayla's eyes tracked the flows of energy across the consoles. Adjust the dorsal harmonics to compensate for their evasive maneuvers. Pulse lances, now, on my mark, wait, fire. The beams cut through the Carrack formation with pinpoint precision, striking dread beasts and rammers alike, shattering their coordinated advance. The bridge erupted in a mixture of shock and restrained exclamations. Officers followed her subtle lead, guided by the rhythm she set, their own experience and training secondary to her intuitive control. The fleet shifted like a single organism, responding to her touch, weaving through the chaos with grace and lethal accuracy. Joran Hale, watching from the lower decks, felt a surge of both fear and pride. His daughter, small and quiet, had taken command of the galaxy's most advanced warship and was using it to save the fleet. The pulse of the living crystal beneath the hull resonated with her instincts, her intuition guiding every strike, every pivot, every defensive maneuver. A massive dread beast surged from the left flank, glowing with malignant energy. Pulse cannons fired automatically but dispersed harmlessly across its armored shell. The bridge tensed, this was the moment that could decide the battle. Kayla did not flinch. She pressed a series of rapid sequences, eyes narrowing as she tracked the feedback of energy through the hull. Forward arrays, recalibrate. Dorsal lances, focus on weak points. Shields, compensate for recoil. Wait, fire. The flagship pulsed with living power. Energy beams struck the dread beast with surgical precision, cracking its carapace and destabilizing its bioluminescent systems. The creature reeled violently, its advance faltering as smaller rammers collided with one another in confusion. Tactical's limbs moved rapidly, adjusting fleet vectors to maintain alignment with the flagship's new rhythm. All units, maintain formation. Follow the flagship's lead. Do not break the cadence. The Carrack advance was splintering. Squadrons misaligned, dread beasts faltered, and the rammers detonated prematurely. The fleet moved in perfect synchronicity, guided by Kayla's quiet, intuitive commands. Saithas's pride and fear wrestled within him. The ship, alive and responsive, obeyed the instincts of a human child more than his centuries of command. Yet the results were undeniable. The fleet's advantage had turned, the Carrack were faltering, and survival now seemed possible. Kayla's hands moved steadily, never hesitating, adjusting sequences, harmonics, and energy flows in real time. The Aurora's crown thrummed beneath her touch, alive, responsive, and lethal. The Carrack assault began to crumble, their formations breaking, their advance splintering under the precision of her instinctive guidance. The Admiral finally allowed himself a thought he had never admitted aloud: the flagship, the fleet, and the outcome of the battle were no longer defined by doctrine, rank, or even the brilliance of Varith engineering. They were defined by the quiet, intuitive genius of a human child who had seen patterns where others saw only chaos, and whose instinct had become the linchpin of survival. Kayla Hale's small hands continued their dance across the controls, guiding the Aurora's crown and the fleet with calm precision. The pulse of the ship, the rhythm of the weapons, and the harmony of shields and engines created a living symphony of destruction that even the Carrack could not counter. Victory was within reach, and it was her hands, her intuition, and her quiet brilliance that would lead them there. The battlefield lay in ruin, scattered with the remnants of shattered Carrack rammers and broken dread beasts, drifting like glowing embers through the void. The Aurora's crown pulsed softly, a living heartbeat that vibrated through every deck. Kayla Hale's small hands rested lightly on the console, eyes scanning the fading energy signatures of the retreating swarm. Her breaths were steady, controlled, yet every officer on the bridge could feel the tension still coiled within the ship. Saithas stood rigid, spines bristling, facets fixed on the human child who had, against all expectation, saved the fleet. His voice, usually sharp and commanding, was quiet. "She has done what none of us could. The flagship obeyed her, and the fleet lives because of her instinct." Tactical's limbs moved automatically, securing the ship's systems, recalibrating shields and engines, but even she could not stop glancing at Kayla. "Admiral, she's extraordinary. She's not trained. She's human." And yet, her voice trailed as she gestured helplessly at the displays, showing the precise devastation left in the wake of the Carrack assault. Kayla's gaze lingered on the viewport, watching the retreating swarm. "They're leaving," she murmured softly. "They've learned not to press. We won." Her small smile was quiet, almost shy, but it carried the weight of everything she had done. Saithas's eyes, multifaceted and sharp, regarded her with a mixture of awe, disbelief, and something new, respect. Centuries of commanding the most advanced fleet in the Dominion had never prepared him for this. "Do you realize," he said slowly, "that you have saved the pride of the Dominion? Not just the ship, the fleet, countless lives." Kayla shrugged lightly. "I just helped it do what it wanted. Like Dad's freighter. It's all connected. You watch, you listen, and you nudge." The Admiral's spines twitched in a subtle, unfamiliar gesture, almost a bow of recognition. He had spent a lifetime mastering vessels of living crystal, commanding fleets, and asserting authority over perfection. And yet here, in the aftermath of battle, he understood that mastery did not always come from doctrine or training. Sometimes, it came from observation, intuition, and quiet brilliance. Joran Hale, standing on the lower decks, exhaled in relief. His daughter, small, quiet, and underestimated, had taken command of the galaxy's most advanced warship and turned the tide of battle. Pride and disbelief warred within him. "That's my girl," he whispered, voice trembling. "That's my daughter." Kayla's eyes flicked toward him, just for a moment, and a faint smile curved her lips. She had been focused entirely on the ship, the fleet, and the rhythm that guided them, but the silent acknowledgement of her father gave her a grounding sense of accomplishment. Sathis turned back to the bridge, scanning the now still void outside the viewport. The Carrick swarm was retreating, scattered, defeated not by sheer numbers or firepower, but by coordination and intuition that defied conventional logic. The fleet had survived, the flagship was alive, and the Dominion's pride had been restored, not through command, but through trust in a human child. "Prepare for post-battle protocols," Tactical said, limbs still moving across her consoles, though her tone was subdued, reverent. "The fleet will need repairs, recalibration, and debriefing." Kayla leaned back slightly from the console, her hands resting lightly. She had guided the flagship, orchestrated the fleet, and saved countless lives, yet she looked almost ordinary. A small human child among giants. And yet, the ship pulsed in quiet acknowledgement of her touch, its living crystal resonating with the rhythm she had set, as if it understood that this victory was hers. Sathis approached her slowly, facets observing every movement. He knelt slightly, a gesture almost alien in its humility, and said, "Kayla Hale, you have proven that instinct and intuition can surpass training and doctrine. You have saved us all. The Dominion owes you its survival today." Kayla blinked, small hands tightening in her lap. "I just did what felt right," she said softly. The Admiral nodded, understanding that it was enough. In that quiet acknowledgement, the bridge officers, Tactical included, felt a profound shift. The pride of the Dominion was not only in its fleets or ships, but now in the unassuming brilliance of humanity itself. Outside, the void was still, save for drifting wreckage and the faint glow of distant stars. The fleet slowly reassembled, shields recalibrating, engines humming in unison with the flagship's living crystal pulse. The Aurora's crown had survived, the swarm had been defeated, and the rhythm that had guided them, quiet, human, brilliant, remained. Kayla Hale finally allowed herself to relax. Her hands rested on the console, the soft hum of the ship resonating against her fingertips. The battle was over. The fleet was safe. She had done what no one thought possible, and the living vessel seemed to acknowledge her victory, pulsing with quiet, vibrant life. Sathis observed her, facets glinting with understanding. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "the future will not belong to perfection alone, but to those who can see patterns in chaos, and guide with intuition where we cannot." Kayla looked at him, a small, quiet smile on her face. "Maybe," she whispered, eyes returning to the viewport, "sometimes even the smallest hands can steer the biggest ship." And for the first time, the Aurora's crown purred through the void, alive, responsive, and whole, carrying the fleet, its pride restored, under the quiet guidance of a human child who had proven that even the most advanced vessel could be tamed not by perfection or doctrine, but by understanding, intuition, and courage. The Admiral allowed himself a final thought, unspoken but clear in his mind: the fleet would never forget this day. And neither would he.